Officer Mitchell thought he knew grief. Ever since the tragic loss of his son, Ethan, he had been just a man going through the motions, using his job as a way to numb the pain. But when he pulled over a young man named DeShawn during a routine traffic stop, his world was turned upside down. DeShawn, raised in hardship and unaware of the truth that bound them, bore an uncanny resemblance to the son Mitchell thought he had lost forever. As they start to uncover hidden secrets that link their lives, the truth forces both men to confront the past they never knew they shared. In a story where the bonds of family, forgiveness, and self-discovery are tested, who will find the strength to move forward? And what happens when the lines between love and loss begin to blur? Before we dive into this emotional journey, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you're ready to witness the unraveling of hidden truths that could change everything, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange. A fine mist hung low over the quiet rural road, giving the landscape an ethereal quality. Officer James Mitchell guided his patrol car along the winding asphalt, his eyes scanning the surroundings out of habit rather than necessity. The early morning shift was usually uneventful, but he preferred it that way. The solitude allowed him to lose himself in the routine, a welcome distraction from the grief that had become his constant companion over the past year. As he rounded a bend, Mitchell's gaze fell on the framed photo clipped to his sun visor. Ethan's bright smile beamed back at him, frozen in time at 18 years old. The sight of his son's face sent a familiar pang through Mitchell's chest. He reached up, his calloused fingers brushing the edge of the frame, before quickly pulling away. Even after a year, the pain was still too raw. Mitchell forced his attention back to the road, willing the memories to recede. But in the quiet of the patrol car, his mind wandered to happier times. "Dad, watch this," 10-year-old Ethan called out, his face a mask of determination as he stood poised at the edge of the dock. Mitchell looked up from where he was securing the boat, a grin spreading across his face. "All right, kiddo, show me what you've got." Ethan took a deep breath, bounced twice on the weathered wood, and launched himself into the air. He tucked his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them as he sailed over the water. With a triumphant cannonball, he plunged into the lake, sending up an impressive spray. Mitchell laughed, shielding his eyes from the shower of droplets. When Ethan surfaced, sputtering and grinning from ear to ear, Mitchell gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up. "That was your best one yet." Ethan paddled back to the dock, his wet hair plastered to his forehead. Mitchell reached down to help him out of the water. "You've been practicing, haven't you?" Every day after school, Ethan admitted, a hint of pride in his voice. "I wanted to surprise you." Mitchell felt a swell of affection for his son. He ruffled Ethan's damp hair, earning a playful groan of protest. "Well, consider me thoroughly impressed. Now, what do you say we get out on the water and catch some fish?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "Race you to the boat." As they spent the afternoon on the lake, Mitchell marveled at how quickly Ethan was growing up. The boy's enthusiasm for life was infectious, and Mitchell found himself treasuring these moments more than ever. He vowed to make the most of every second they had together, never imagining how precious that time would become. The memory faded, leaving Mitchell with a bittersweet ache in his chest. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. If only he'd known then how little time they truly had left. A flash of movement caught Mitchell's eye, pulling him back to the present. An old sedan up ahead was weaving slightly, crossing the center line before jerking back into its lane. Mitchell frowned, flipping on his lights and siren. Officer James Mitchell's patrol car rolled to a stop behind the old, faded blue sedan. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the strange sense of déjà vu that had settled over him. It was just another routine traffic stop, he told himself. Nothing more. As he approached the driver's side window, Mitchell's trained eyes scanned the vehicle. The car had seen better days, with rust spots dotting the wheel wells and a small crack spiderwebbing across the bottom corner of the windshield. The window rolled down with a faint squeak, and Mitchell opened his mouth to deliver his usual greeting. The words never came. Time seemed to slow as Mitchell's gaze fell upon the young man behind the wheel. His heart lurched painfully in his chest, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. It was as if he were looking at a ghost, a darker-skinned version of his late son, Ethan. The same warm brown eyes, now filled with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. The same high cheekbones and strong jawline. Even the slight furrow of his brow as he waited for Mitchell to speak was achingly familiar. Is everything all right, officer?" the young man asked, his voice snapping Mitchell back to reality. Mitchell blinked rapidly, forcing himself to focus. "Yes, license and registration, please," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. As the driver reached for his documents, Mitchell's gaze was drawn to a photo tucked into the dashboard. His breath caught in his throat. The image showed a young boy, no more than 5 or 6 years old, with a woman Mitchell could not see clearly. But it was the boy's face that held Mitchell's attention. If not for the darker skin, he could have sworn he was looking at a photo of Ethan from years ago. Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the license and registration. He glanced at the name, DeShawn Johnson. A perfectly ordinary name that somehow felt significant in a way Mitchell couldn't explain. "Mr. Johnson," Mitchell said, struggling to keep his voice steady, "do you know why I pulled you over today?" DeShawn shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. "I'm not sure, sir. Was I speeding?" Mitchell shook his head. "You were weaving a bit back there. Have you had anything to drink this morning?" "No, sir," DeShawn replied quickly. "I haven't slept much lately, that's all. I know I shouldn't be driving tired, but I had to get to work." As DeShawn spoke, Mitchell found his attention drawn back to the dashboard photo. The resemblance to Ethan was uncanny, stirring up a whirlwind of emotions he thought he'd buried. Grief, longing, and a gnawing curiosity he couldn't shake. "That photo," Mitchell said, gesturing to the dashboard. "Is that you?" DeShawn glanced at the picture, his expression softening. "Yeah, that's me and my mom." Mitchell hesitated, then asked, "Your mother, is she?" DeShawn's face fell, and he looked away. "She passed away a few weeks ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry for your loss," Mitchell said softly, the words carrying the weight of his own grief. An awkward silence fell between them. Mitchell knew he should focus on the traffic stop, but he couldn't tear his thoughts away from the impossible coincidence before him. He handed back DeShawn's license and registration, his mind racing. "Listen, Mr. Johnson," Mitchell began, then paused, unsure how to continue. "This may sound strange, but would you be willing to meet me later? To talk?" DeShawn's brow furrowed in confusion. "Talk? About what?" Mitchell hesitated, unsure how to explain the tumult of emotions and questions swirling inside him. "It's complicated, but I think it might be important. For both of us." DeShawn studied Mitchell's face for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "All right, I guess. Where and when?" They agreed to meet at a local diner after DeShawn's shift ended. As Mitchell watched the old sedan pull away, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change dramatically. Again, the rest of Mitchell's shift passed in a blur. He went through the motions of his duties, but his mind kept drifting back to DeShawn and that photo. By the time he clocked out, Mitchell's thoughts had spiraled into a web of half-formed theories and long-buried memories. As he drove to the diner, Mitchell found himself thinking of Lisa for the first time in years. Their relationship had been brief but intense, a whirlwind romance that ended as suddenly as it began. He'd been young then, just starting his career in law enforcement. Lisa had been vibrant and full of life, with dreams of traveling the world as a photojournalist. For a few months, they'd been inseparable. Mitchell had even started to imagine a future together. But then, without warning or explanation, Lisa vanished. He tried to find her, worried sick that something had happened. But it was as if she disappeared into thin air. Weeks turned into months, and eventually, Mitchell had to accept that Lisa was gone. He threw himself into his work, trying to forget the ache of her absence. And then, on a crisp autumn morning nearly a year after Lisa left, everything changed again. Mitchell had just finished a night shift when he found the basket on his front porch. Inside, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, was a baby boy. A note tucked beside him read simply, "His name is Ethan. I'm sorry. Please take care of him. L." The shock of becoming an instant father was overwhelming. Mitchell had considered trying to find Lisa to demand answers. But as he looked down at the tiny, helpless child in his arms, he knew he couldn't risk losing Ethan. Whatever Lisa's reasons, She had entrusted their son to him. Mitchell vowed then and there to be the best father he could be. As the years passed, the mystery of Lisa's disappearance faded into the background. Mitchell's world revolved around Ethan, watching him grow from a curious toddler into a kind, intelligent young man. The pain of Lisa's absence was replaced by the joy of fatherhood. Until that awful night a year ago, when a drunk driver stole it all away. Mitchell pulled into the diner parking lot, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He took a few deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. What was he doing here? What did he hope to accomplish by meeting DeShawn? The rational part of his mind told him this was crazy, that he was grasping at straws because of his grief. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this. The resemblance between DeShawn and Ethan was too strong to be mere coincidence. In that photo, Mitchell closed his eyes, remembering the little boy's face. It was like looking at a photo of Ethan from another life. Taking one final deep breath, Mitchell got out of the car and headed into the diner. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and he scanned the room, spotting DeShawn at a booth in the corner. The young man looked up, a mix of curiosity and wariness on his face as Mitchell approached. "Thanks for meeting me," Mitchell said, sliding into the seat across from DeShawn. "I appreciate you taking the time." DeShawn nodded, his fingers fidgeting with the paper wrapper from his straw. "No problem. But I gotta admit, I'm still not sure why I'm here. Am I in some kind of trouble?" Mitchell shook his head. "No, nothing like that. There's something I need to ask you about. It might sound strange, but I hope you'll hear me out." DeShawn leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "All right, I'm listening." Mitchell took a deep breath, then plunged ahead. "That photo on your dashboard, the one of you as a kid with your mom, do you know when it was taken?" DeShawn's brow furrowed. I'm not sure exactly. I was pretty young, maybe 5 or 6. "Why?" "And your mother," Mitchell pressed on. "What was her name?" "Lisa," DeShawn replied, his confusion deepening. "Lisa Johnson. Look, what's this about?" Mitchell's heart skipped a beat at the name. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting a worn photograph. He placed it on the table, sliding it towards DeShawn. "This is my son, Ethan," Mitchell said softly. He passed away a year ago." DeShawn's eyes widened as he looked at the photo. "Holy shit," he whispered. "He looks just like you," Mitchell finished. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think there might be a connection here. A connection between you and Ethan. And maybe between you and me." DeShawn stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked up at Mitchell, his expression a mix of disbelief and dawning realization. "What are you saying?" Mitchell took a deep breath. "I knew your mother, Lisa. We were together, briefly, about 20 years ago. She disappeared suddenly, and I never knew why. A year later, I found Ethan on my doorstep with a note from her. I think it's possible that you and Ethan might have been twins," DeShawn finished, his voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his seat, running a hand over his face. This is insane. You're saying you think you might be my father? And that I had a brother I never knew about?" Mitchell nodded slowly. "I know it sounds impossible, but the resemblance between you and Ethan, it's uncanny. And the timing, it all fits." DeShawn stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air," he said, his voice shaky. Without another word, he turned and headed for the door. Mitchell watched him go, his heart heavy. He knew he was asking DeShawn to accept something monumental, something that would change his entire world. But Mitchell couldn't let this go. He had to know the truth. After a few minutes, Mitchell stood and followed DeShawn outside. He found the young man leaning against the side of the building, staring up at the night sky. "I'm sorry," Mitchell said softly. "I know this is a lot to take in." DeShawn turned to look at him, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "My whole life," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I wondered about my dad. Mom never talked about him, never even told me his name. And now you're telling me that not only did I have a father, but I had a brother too? A brother who's gone before I ever got the chance to know him." Mitchell felt his own eyes stinging. "I know it's not fair. None of this is fair. But DeShawn, if there's even a chance that what I'm saying is true, don't you want to know?" DeShawn was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, I do." But how? How can we be sure? Mitchell took a deep breath. There are tests we can do. DNA tests. They can tell us for certain if we're related. If you're willing, we could. Okay, DeShawn interrupted. Let's do it. I need to know the truth. Mitchell felt a wave of relief wash over him. Thank you, he said. I know this isn't easy, but I promise you, whatever the results, we'll face it together. DeShawn nodded, then asked hesitantly, Can you tell me about him? About Ethan? Mitchell smiled sadly. Of course. Why don't we go back inside? I'll tell you everything you want to know. As they walked back into the diner, Mitchell felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in a year. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that somehow, someway, Ethan had led him to this moment. And whatever came next, he would face it with the strength and courage his son had always inspired in him. The days following Mitchell and DeShawn's initial meeting at the diner were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries. For Mitchell, it felt like opening a long-sealed vault of memories, each one bringing a mixture of joy and pain as he revisited his brief but intense relationship with Lisa. In the quiet of his home office, Mitchell pored over old photo albums and boxes of mementos he'd tucked away years ago. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the lid off a dusty shoebox, revealing a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. These were the few letters Lisa had sent him during their time together, before her sudden disappearance. As he read through them, Mitchell was struck by the passion and hope in Lisa's words. She wrote of her dreams to travel the world, to capture life's most beautiful moments through her camera lens. But there was also an underlying current of uncertainty, a hint of something held back that Mitchell had never fully understood at the time. One particular line caught his eye. Sometimes I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads, James. Like the decision I make next will change everything. I just hope, whatever happens, you'll understand someday. Mitchell set the letter down, his mind racing. Had Lisa known she was pregnant when she wrote this? Was she already wrestling with the impossible decision she would ultimately make? Across town, DeShawn was engaged in his own journey of discovery. After their meeting at the diner, he had returned to his small apartment with a newfound determination to uncover the truth about his past. His mother's death was still a fresh wound, but now, the possibility of finally understanding the secrets she'd kept all these years drove him forward. DeShawn pulled out the boxes of his mother's belongings he'd been avoiding since her passing. Each item seemed to hold new significance now. Every photograph, every trinket a potential clue to the life she'd led before he was born. As he sifted through a box of old papers, a worn envelope slipped out and fell to the floor. DeShawn picked it up, noticing it was addressed to him in his mother's handwriting. With shaking hands, he opened it and began to read. My dearest DeShawn, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you, and I'm so sorry for that. There's so much I've wanted to tell you over the years, but fear and shame held me back. Now, I realize that you deserve to know the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to hear. 20 years ago, I fell in love with a man named James Mitchell. He was kind, brave, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. But our relationship was complicated from the start. James was a young police officer, just beginning his career, and I was a free spirit with dreams of traveling the world as a photojournalist. When I discovered I was pregnant, I was overjoyed but terrified. And then I learned something that changed everything. I was carrying twins. DeShawn's breath caught in his throat as he read those words. Twins. The confirmation of what Mitchell had suspected hit him like a physical blow. He had a brother. Had a brother. With trembling hands, he continued reading. I knew then that I had an impossible choice to make. James was building a promising career in law enforcement, and I feared that having children, especially with a black woman, could jeopardize everything he'd worked for. The world wasn't as accepting then as we might hope it is now, so I made the hardest decision of my life. I left town without telling James about the pregnancy. When the time came, I gave birth to you and your brother, Ethan, and then I did something I'll regret for the rest of my days. I separated you. I left Ethan on James' doorstep with a note, knowing he would provide the stable, loving home that I wasn't sure I could give. And I kept you with me, my beautiful boy, determined to give you the best life I could on my own. I know you must have so many questions, so much anger and hurt. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope that someday you'll understand that I did what I thought was best at the time, even if I was wrong." DeShawn lowered the letter, his vision blurring with tears. The truth he'd sought for so long was finally in his hands, and it was more overwhelming than he could have imagined. A week after their initial meeting, Mitchell and DeShawn agreed to meet again at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. The place was quiet, with only a handful of patrons scattered among the mismatched tables and chairs. It felt like neutral ground, a space where they could continue to navigate the complex emotions and revelations that had upended both their lives. Mitchell arrived first, choosing a table in the corner that offered some privacy. He ordered a coffee, more out of habit than desire, and found himself obsessively straightening the sugar packets as he waited. When DeShawn walked in, Mitchell was struck again by the young man's resemblance to Ethan. It was like seeing a ghost, but one that brought a strange mixture of pain and hope. "Hey," DeShawn said softly as he slid into the seat across from Mitchell. "Thanks for meeting me." Mitchell nodded, pushing aside the tangle of emotions rising in his chest. "Of course. How are you holding up?" DeShawn let out a long breath. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It's been a lot to process, but I found something I think you need to see." He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to Mitchell. "What's this?" Mitchell asked, his hand hovering over the envelope. "It's a letter," DeShawn replied. "From my mom, from Lisa. She wrote it before she died, explaining everything." Mitchell's heart raced as he carefully opened the envelope and began to read. As Lisa's words unfolded before him, he felt a whirlwind of emotions: shock, grief, anger, and a profound sense of loss for the years that could have been. When he finished, he looked up at DeShawn, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I had no idea," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All these years, I never knew." DeShawn nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I know. It's crazy, right? To think that we were out there, living separate lives, never knowing about each other." Mitchell leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "I keep thinking about all the moments I shared with Ethan, all the milestones and memories. And now, knowing that you were out there too, I miss so much of your life, DeShawn. I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," DeShawn said softly. "You didn't know. My mom, she made her choices. I'm still trying to understand why, but I know she thought she was doing the right thing." Mitchell nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of the letter. "She was trying to protect my career, my future. But if I'd known about you both, none of that would have mattered. I would have done anything to be there for you. For both of you." A heavy silence fell between them, both men lost in thoughts of what might have been. Finally, DeShawn spoke up. Can you tell me about him? About Ethan? What was he like?" Mitchell felt a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. He was amazing. Kind, smart, always ready with a joke to lighten the mood. He had this way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. As Mitchell spoke, painting a picture of the brother DeShawn never knew, they both felt a connection growing between them. It was tentative, fragile, but undeniably real, a bridge across the years of separation and loss. "He sounds a lot like you," Mitchell said softly, studying DeShawn's face. "The way you carry yourself, the look in your eyes when you're thinking deeply about something. It's so familiar. It's like seeing parts of Ethan live on." DeShawn ducked his head, overwhelmed by the mixture of grief and belonging that washed over him. "I wish I could have known him," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Me too," Mitchell replied. "But DeShawn, I want you to know, I may have missed out on your childhood, on watching you grow up, but if you're willing, I'd like to be part of your life now. I know I can't replace the years we lost, but maybe we can build something new together." DeShawn looked up, meeting Mitchell's gaze. For a moment, he saw not just the man who might be his father, but a reflection of himself, of Ethan, of the family he never knew he had. Slowly, he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'd like that." As they continued to talk, sharing stories and piecing together the fragments of their shared history, both Mitchell and DeShawn felt a sense of healing begin to take root. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and emotional hurdles to overcome. But in that small cafe, Surrounded by the aroma of coffee and the soft murmur of conversation, they took the first steps toward forging a new kind of family, one built on truth, understanding, and the unbreakable bond of shared loss and newfound connection. The letter from Lisa lay between them on the table, a testament to the complexities of love, sacrifice, and the choices that shape our lives. It was a painful truth, but one that had finally brought them together. And as they talked long into the afternoon, both Mitchell and DeShawn felt a glimmer of hope for the future, a future where they could face whatever came next, not alone, but together. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the park where Mitchell and DeShawn had agreed to meet. It had been several weeks since their revelation at the cafe, and in that time, they had slowly begun to build a tentative relationship. Today, they walked side by side along a winding path, the silence between them comfortable but heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, DeShawn broke the quiet. I've been thinking a lot about my mom lately, about our life together. Mitchell glanced at him, nodding encouragingly. I'd like to hear about it if you're willing to share. DeShawn took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. It wasn't easy, Mom did her best, but we struggled a lot. There were times when we barely had enough to eat, when the electricity would get cut off because we couldn't pay the bills. As DeShawn spoke, Mitchell felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. He thought of the comfortable life he had provided for Ethan, the opportunities and security his son had enjoyed. The stark contrast to DeShawn's experiences was painful to contemplate. I started working as soon as I was old enough, DeShawn continued. Paper routes, mowing lawns, anything I could do to help out. By the time I was in high school, I was working part-time at a gas station, trying to juggle school and work, and taking care of Mom when she got sick. Mitchell listened intently, his heart aching for the hardships this young man had endured. That must have been incredibly difficult, he said softly. You shouldered so much responsibility at such a young age. DeShawn nodded, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. Yeah, it was tough. And you know what the worst part was? Seeing other kids like Ethan, I guess, who had it so much easier, who had two parents, or even just one who could provide for them without struggle. I used to be so angry, wondering why I had to fight so hard for everything when others seemed to have it all handed to them. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with years of pent-up frustration and pain. Mitchell stopped walking, turning to face DeShawn directly. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're right to feel angry. It's not fair, what you went through, what you missed out on. DeShawn met Mitchell's gaze, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I know it's not your fault. You didn't know about me. But sometimes I can't help but think about how different things could have been. If Mom had made a different choice, if I had grown up with you and Ethan. Mitchell reached out, hesitating for a moment before placing a hand on DeShawn's shoulder. I wish I could change the past, he said softly. I wish I could go back and be there for you, for both of you. But DeShawn, I want you to know that I'm here now. Whatever you need, whatever support I can offer, it's yours. I know it doesn't make up for all those years, but I promise you, from this moment on, you have me in your corner. The sincerity in Mitchell's words seemed to break something open in DeShawn. He let out a shuddering breath, and suddenly, he was crying deep, racking sobs that spoke of years of pent-up pain and longing. Without hesitation, Mitchell pulled him into an embrace. As DeShawn cried against his shoulder, Mitchell felt his own tears falling. They stood there together, two men bound by loss and newfound connection, finally allowing themselves to grieve for all that had been lost and all that might have been. When DeShawn finally pulled back, wiping at his eyes, he gave Mitchell a watery smile. Thanks, he said softly. I think I needed that. Mitchell nodded, squeezing DeShawn's shoulder gently. Me too, son. Me too. The word son hung in the air between them, new and fragile, but filled with promise. As they resumed their walk, both men felt as if a weight had been lifted, a first step taken on the long road to healing. Over the next few weeks, Mitchell and DeShawn began to forge a deeper connection. They met regularly, sometimes for meals, sometimes just to talk or watch a game together. Each interaction brought new discoveries, moments of shared laughter, and occasional pangs of sadness for the years they had missed. One crisp Saturday morning, they found themselves standing side by side in front of Ethan's grave. Mitchell had suggested the visit, feeling it was important for DeShawn to have a tangible connection to the brother he never knew. As they laid flowers at the base of the headstone, Mitchell spoke softly about Ethan. His infectious laugh, his passion for photography, the way he could light up a room just by walking into it. DeShawn listened intently, trying to piece together an image of the brother he would never meet. "He would have loved you," Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. "God, I can just imagine the two of you together. You would have been inseparable." DeShawn nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I wish I could have known him," he said softly. "Sometimes I dream about it, about growing up together, having a brother to share everything with." Mitchell put an arm around DeShawn's shoulders, pulling him close. "I know it's not the same," he said, "but I hope you know that you're not alone anymore. We may have missed out on those years, but we have now. And I promise you, DeShawn, I'm going to do everything I can to be the father you deserve." As they stood there together, the autumn breeze rustling the leaves around them, both men felt a sense of peace settle over them. It wasn't perfect, and the pain of what they had lost would never fully fade, but in that moment, they knew they were on the right path. In the weeks that followed, Mitchell threw himself into supporting DeShawn's dreams and ambitions with the same enthusiasm he had once devoted to Ethan's. When DeShawn mentioned his interest in going back to school, Mitchell immediately offered to help. They spent evenings poring over college brochures and financial aid forms, with Mitchell insisting on covering whatever cost DeShawn's scholarships did. "I've got years of birthdays and Christmases to make up for," he joked, but the emotion behind the words was genuine. DeShawn found himself overwhelmed by the support and used to having someone so firmly in his corner. "You don't have to do all this," he said one night as they sat surrounded by application papers. Mitchell looked up, his expression serious. "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to. DeShawn, I missed out on so much of your life. I can't change that, but I can be here for you now, supporting you every step of the way. That's what fathers do." The word father still felt new and slightly strange to DeShawn, but he couldn't deny the warmth it brought. For the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere, like he had a family that extended beyond just him and his mother. As the fall semester approached, DeShawn found himself accepted into a local community college with plans to study social work. The day his acceptance letter arrived, Mitchell insisted on taking him out to celebrate. Over dinner at a nice restaurant, fancier than anywhere DeShawn had ever eaten before, Mitchell raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "And to the incredible young man you've become, DeShawn. I may have missed watching you grow up, but I'm so grateful I get to be part of your life now." DeShawn felt a lump form in his throat as he clinked his glass against Mitchell's. "Thanks, Dad," he said, the words still feeling slightly foreign on his tongue. "For everything." As they ate and talked about DeShawn's plans for the future, both men felt a sense of hope and possibility that neither had experienced in a long time. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to build, and a lifetime of catching up to do. But in that moment, surrounded by the warm glow of the restaurant and the even warmer feeling of newfound family, both Mitchell and DeShawn knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Later that night, as DeShawn lay in bed in his small apartment, he found himself thinking about his mother. He missed her terribly, and part of him wished she could see how things had turned out. But as he drifted off to sleep, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Somehow, he knew that wherever she was, his mom would be happy to see that he had finally found the family connection he had always longed for. And across town, Mitchell sat in his living room, looking at the photos of Ethan that lined the mantel. With gentle care, he placed a new frame beside them, a picture of him and DeShawn from their dinner that night, both smiling broadly at the camera. It wasn't a replacement for what he had lost, but a new chapter, a chance to be the father he had always strived to be. As he turned off the lights and headed to bed, Mitchell felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since losing Ethan. He couldn't change the past, but he could make the most of this unexpected second chance at fatherhood. And he vowed to himself, to DeShawn, and to Ethan's memory that he would do everything in his power to be the best father he could be, not just for the son he had lost, but for the son he had found. The news of Officer Mitchell's long-lost son spread through the small town like wildfire. What began as hushed whispers in the local diner soon became the topic of every conversation at the grocery store, church, and even the high school football games. For Mitchell and DeShawn, who were still navigating the delicate beginnings of their relationship, the sudden spotlight was both uncomfortable and challenging. One sunny afternoon, Mitchell and DeShawn decided to grab lunch at Rosie's Diner, a local favorite known for its home-style cooking and friendly atmosphere. As they walked in, the usual chatter of the diner fell to a hush. Eyes darted between them, and whispers barely concealed by raised menus filled the air. "Did you hear? That's Officer Mitchell's secret son. I always thought there was something off about that man. Poor Ethan, may he rest in peace. What would he think of this?" DeShawn felt his shoulders tense as they made their way to an empty booth. He could feel the weight of judgmental stares on his back, making him acutely aware of his skin color in a way he hadn't felt in years. Mitchell, sensing DeShawn's discomfort, leaned across the table. "Hey, you okay?" he asked softly. DeShawn nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just not used to being the center of attention, I guess." As they perused their menus, a waitress approached their table. Her smile seemed strained as she addressed Mitchell. "Good afternoon, officer. What can I get for you today?" Mitchell smiled back, trying to keep the atmosphere light. "Hey, Sarah. I'll have the usual cheeseburger and fries." "DeShawn, what would you like?" Before DeShawn could answer, Sarah turned to him, her demeanor noticeably cooler. "And for you?" she asked, barely making eye contact. DeShawn cleared his throat. I'll have the same, please." "Thank you." As Sarah walked away, Mitchell's brow furrowed. He had noticed the change in her attitude, and it didn't sit well with him. "I'm sorry about that," he said to DeShawn. "Sarah's usually much friendlier." DeShawn shrugged, trying to brush it off. "It's okay. I'm used to it." Those words hit Mitchell like a punch to the gut. The idea that his son, because that's who DeShawn was to him now, regardless of the circumstances, was used to being treated differently because of his skin color was unacceptable. Their meal arrived, and they ate in relative silence, both hyper-aware of the glances and whispers around them. As they were finishing up, a man from a nearby table approached them, his face set in a disapproving frown. "Officer Mitchell," the man said, his voice laced with barely concealed contempt. "I just wanted to say, I'm real disappointed in you. We all looked up to you, thought you were one of the good ones. But this," he gestured towards DeShawn, "this ain't right." Mitchell felt a surge of anger rising within him. He stood up slowly, his voice low but firm. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your concern, but I think you're overstepping. DeShawn is my son, and I won't have anyone speaking about him or our family in that manner." The diner had gone silent, all eyes on the confrontation. DeShawn sat frozen, a mix of emotions playing across his face. Mitchell continued, his voice rising slightly. "I may not have known about DeShawn for most of his life, and that's something I'll always regret. But now that I do know him, I couldn't be prouder to call him my son. He's a kind, intelligent young man who's overcome more challenges than most of us can imagine. And if anyone has a problem with that, well, they can take it up with me directly." The silence in the diner was deafening. Mr. Thompson, red-faced, muttered something under his breath and retreated to his table. Mitchell sat back down, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. DeShawn looked at him, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. Mitchell reached across the table, placing his hand on DeShawn's arm. "Yes, I did. You're my son, DeShawn. And I'm not going to let anyone make you feel less than because of who you are or where you came from. We're family now, and family stands up for each other." As they left the diner, DeShawn felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the food. For the first time in his life, he truly felt like he had someone in his corner, someone willing to face the world's prejudices head-on for his sake. A few days later, Mitchell invited DeShawn over to his house. As they sat in the living room, surrounded by photos of Ethan, Mitchell brought out a worn cardboard box. "I've been meaning to show you this," he said, setting the box on the coffee table. "These are some of Ethan's things. I thought, Well, I thought you might like to see them. DeShawn nodded, a lump forming in his throat. As Mitchell opened the box, DeShawn's eyes were drawn to a leather-bound journal sitting on top. "What's that?" he asked. Mitchell picked up the journal, a sad smile playing on his lips. This was Ethan's journal. He started writing in it during his junior year of high school. I've never been able to bring myself to read it all the way through." He handed the journal to DeShawn, who took it with careful hands. "Are you sure you want me to read this?" DeShawn asked, feeling the weight of trust Mitchell was placing in him. Mitchell nodded. "I think Ethan would have wanted you to know him, even if it's just through his words." As DeShawn began to read, he felt as if he was stepping into his brother's world. Ethan's words painted a picture of a young man full of dreams and ambitions, someone who cared deeply about others and wanted to make a difference in the world. One entry, in particular, caught DeShawn's attention. "Volunteered at the community center again today. Met a kid named Marcus. Reminded me of how lucky I am. He's so smart, but life's dealt him a tough hand. I wish I could do more to help kids like him. Maybe someday I can start a program or something, give them the opportunities they deserve." DeShawn looked up at Mitchell, his eyes shining. "You wanted to help kids like me," he said softly. Mitchell nodded, his own eyes misting over. That was Ethan, always thinking of others, always wanting to make things better. As DeShawn continued to read, he felt a connection to Ethan growing stronger with each page. He saw sketches of the community center, lists of ideas for fundraisers and programs, and heartfelt reflections on the injustices Ethan saw in the world. "I wish I could have known him," DeShawn said, closing the journal. "He seems like he was an amazing person." Mitchell smiled, reaching out to squeeze DeShawn's shoulder. "He was. And you know what? I see a lot of him in you. That same kindness, that same drive to make a difference." DeShawn felt a surge of emotion at those words. For so long, he had felt like an outsider, like he didn't belong anywhere. But here, in this room filled with memories of a brother he never knew, he felt a sense of purpose and belonging. "I want to continue his work," DeShawn said suddenly. "At the community center. I want to help kids like he wanted to, like I was." Mitchell's face lit up with pride. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Ethan would be so proud of you." Over the next few weeks, DeShawn threw himself into volunteering at the community center. He worked with kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them with homework, organizing sports activities, and just being a friendly ear when they needed someone to talk to. One afternoon, as DeShawn was leaving the center, he ran into a group of young men about his age. They introduced themselves as Ethan's old friends from high school. "You must be DeShawn," one of them, a tall guy named Chris, said. "We've heard about you. It's great to finally meet you." DeShawn felt a moment of apprehension, unsure how Ethan's friends would react to him. But their warm smiles and genuine interest put him at ease. They invited DeShawn to join them for coffee, and soon they were sharing stories about Ethan, his infectious laugh, his terrible jokes, and his unwavering kindness. "You know," Chris said, looking at DeShawn thoughtfully, "Ethan always talked about wanting a brother. He would have loved you, man. No doubt about it." DeShawn felt a lump form in his throat. "Thanks," he managed to say. "I wish I could have known him." As the afternoon wore on, DeShawn found himself laughing and sharing his own stories. For the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of Ethan's world, connected to a family and a community that extended beyond just him and Mitchell. Later that evening, as DeShawn recounted the day's events to Mitchell, he saw a mix of emotions play across the older man's face: joy, pride, and a hint of sadness. "I'm so glad you're getting to know Ethan through his friends," Mitchell said. "And I'm even more glad that they've welcomed you so warmly." There was a moment of silence before Mitchell continued, his voice thick with emotion. "DeShawn, I want you to know how grateful I am for this second chance. I regret so much about the past, about not being there for you when you were growing up and struggling. But I want you to know that I'm here now, and I want to be the father you deserve." DeShawn felt tears prick at his eyes. "I know, Dad," he said, the word feeling more natural each time he used it. "And I'm grateful, too, for this chance to have a family, to be part of something bigger than myself." As they sat there, father and son, both felt the weight of the past and the promise of the future. They had a long way to go, many more challenges to face and wounds to heal. But in that moment, they knew they would face it all together, bound by the love of a son they had both lost and the hope of the family they were building. As the weeks turned into months, Mitchell and DeShawn's relationship continued to grow and evolve. The initial awkwardness and uncertainty had given way to a genuine father-son bond, strengthened by their shared experiences and the memory of Ethan that connected them. One crisp autumn morning, Mitchell found himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his uniform with trembling hands. Today was a big day, not just for him, but for DeShawn as well. As he pinned his badge to his chest, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and anxiety. "You about ready?" DeShawn's voice called from the hallway. Mitchell took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Yeah, just a second," he replied, giving himself one last look in the mirror before stepping out. DeShawn was waiting for him, dressed in a sharp suit that Mitchell had helped him pick out for the occasion. The sight of his son, smartly dressed and standing tall, brought a lump to Mitchell's throat. "You look great, son," Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. DeShawn smiled, a hint of nervousness in his eyes. "Thanks, Dad. You too." As they drove to the community center, the car was filled with a tense but excited energy. Today was the grand opening of the Ethan Mitchell Memorial Youth Program, a project that had consumed both their lives for the past several months. The idea had come to DeShawn not long after reading Ethan's journal. Inspired by his brother's passion for helping underprivileged youth, DeShawn had approached Mitchell with a proposal to create a comprehensive after-school program that would provide academic support, mentorship, and recreational activities for kids in need. Mitchell had thrown himself wholeheartedly into the project, leveraging his connections in the community to secure funding and support. Together, they had worked tirelessly to bring Ethan's dream to life, transforming a section of the community center into a vibrant space dedicated to nurturing young minds and spirits. As they pulled into the parking lot, they could see a crowd already gathering. Local officials, community members, and dozens of excited kids and their families were milling about, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Mitchell placed a hand on DeShawn's shoulder as they got out of the car. "You ready for this?" DeShawn nodded, taking a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The ceremony began, and Mitchell found himself standing at the podium, facing the expectant crowd. He cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Thank you all for being here today. As many of you know, this program is very close to my heart. It's a tribute to my late son, Ethan, and a testament to the power of community and second chances." Mitchell's gaze found DeShawn in the crowd, and he smiled. "It's also a celebration of new beginnings. Many of you have heard by now that I recently discovered I have another son, DeShawn Johnson." A murmur went through the crowd, and Mitchell saw a mix of reactions: curiosity, surprise, and a few frowns. But he pressed on, determined to say what needed to be said. "I know our story has been the subject of a lot of gossip and speculation, and I understand that. It's not every day that a police officer in a small town discovers he has a grown son he never knew about. But I want to say this. DeShawn coming into my life has been one of the greatest blessings I've ever experienced." Mitchell's voice grew more passionate as he continued. "This young man, who grew up without a father, who faced challenges and hardships I can only imagine, has shown me what true strength and resilience look like. He's taught me about forgiveness, about the power of love to overcome prejudice and misunderstanding. And it's because of him that we're all here today." He gestured to the building behind him. This program, the Ethan Mitchell Memorial Youth Program, was DeShawn's idea. Inspired by the brother he never got to meet, he wanted to create something that would make a real difference in the lives of kids who need it most. And I couldn't be prouder of what he's accomplished. Mitchell paused, his eyes misting over. Ethan always dreamed of making the world a better place. And while he's no longer with us, his spirit lives on through this program, and through the brother he never knew he had. As Mitchell stepped back from the podium, the crowd erupted in applause. He saw DeShawn making his way toward him, and without hesitation, Mitchell pulled his son into a tight embrace. "Thank you," DeShawn whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of speeches, ribbon cutting, and tours of the new facilities. As they showed groups of excited kids and parents around the center, Mitchell couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at what they had accomplished. The main room of the center was bright and inviting, with colorful murals depicting scenes of hope and achievement. There were study areas equipped with computers, a small library filled with books, and a rec room with games and sports equipment. But the centerpiece of it all was a large portrait of Ethan, smiling down at everyone who entered. The months that followed were busy ones for both Mitchell and DeShawn. The youth program took off, quickly becoming a vital part of the community. DeShawn threw himself into his role as program director, working tirelessly to ensure that every child who came through their doors felt valued and supported. Mitchell, for his part, became a fixture at the center, volunteering his time whenever he wasn't on duty. He started a mentorship program for kids interested in law enforcement, using his experience to guide and inspire the next generation. As winter gave way to spring, Mitchell noticed a change in DeShawn. His son seemed more confident, more at peace with himself and his place in the world. The anger and resentment that had simmered beneath the surface in those early days had given way to a quiet strength and determination. One evening, as they were locking up the center after a long day, DeShawn turned to Mitchell with a serious expression. "Dad, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about," he said. Mitchell felt a flutter of anxiety in his chest, but he nodded encouragingly. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" DeShawn took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about my future, about what I want to do with my life. And I think I want to become a police officer." Mitchell felt his heart skip a beat. Of all the things he had imagined DeShawn might say, this was not one of them. "Are you sure?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "It's not an easy job, DeShawn. Especially for someone who looks like me." DeShawn finished, a wry smile on his face. "I know, Dad. Believe me, I've thought about it a lot. But I think that's exactly why I need to do it." He gestured around the empty community center. "What we're doing here is great, and it's making a real difference. But I want to do more. I want to be out there in the community, showing kids that look like me that they can be part of the solution, that they can wear the badge and make a difference." Mitchell felt a swell of pride and fear in equal measure. He knew all too well the dangers and challenges DeShawn would face as a black police officer. But he also saw the determination in his son's eyes, the same fire that had driven Ethan to want to change the world. "If that's what you want," Mitchell said slowly, "then I'll support you every step of the way. It won't be easy, but I know you're strong enough to handle it." DeShawn's face broke into a wide grin, and he pulled Mitchell into a hug. "Thanks, Dad. That means everything to me." The next year was a whirlwind of activity. DeShawn enrolled in the police academy, throwing himself into his training with the same dedication he had shown at the youth center. Mitchell watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety as his son navigated the challenges of becoming a police officer. There were difficult moments, times when DeShawn faced subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, racism from instructors or fellow cadets. But he persevered, drawing strength from the memory of Ethan and the unwavering support of his father. Finally, the day of DeShawn's graduation from the academy arrived. As Mitchell pinned the badge to his son's chest, he felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. "Your brother would be so proud of you," Mitchell said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I know I am." DeShawn stood tall, his eyes shining with pride and determination. "I won't let either of you down," he promised. As they walked out of the ceremony together, father and son in matching uniforms, Mitchell couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought them to this point. From strangers bound by loss and secrets, to a family united by love and a shared purpose. The years that followed brought their own challenges and triumphs. DeShawn quickly made a name for himself on the force, his compassion and understanding making him particularly effective in community outreach. He continued to be involved with the youth center, using his position as a police officer to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. Mitchell, watching his son flourish, felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since losing Ethan. He knew that nothing could ever fill the hole left by his firstborn son's death. But in DeShawn, he saw hope for the future, a living legacy of both his son's dreams and aspirations. On a warm summer evening, 5 years after that fateful traffic stop that had brought them together, Mitchell and DeShawn stood side by side at Ethan's grave. They had made it a tradition to come here together on the anniversary of Ethan's death, to remember and to reflect. As they placed fresh flowers on the grave, DeShawn spoke softly. You know, Dad, I used to wonder why things happened the way they did. Why Mom kept me a secret. Why I had to grow up without you. Why Ethan had to die so young. But now I think I understand. Mitchell looked at his son, curiosity in his eyes. What do you mean? DeShawn smiled, a look of quiet wisdom on his face. I think sometimes life breaks us apart so we can come back together stronger. Everything we've been through, the good and the bad, it's all led us here. And here is exactly where we're meant to be. Mitchell felt tears prick at his eyes as he pulled DeShawn into a hug. In that moment, surrounded by the peaceful quiet of the cemetery, he felt the presence of both his sons, the one he had lost and the one he had found. As they walked back to the car, arm in arm, Mitchell knew that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more obstacles to overcome, but they would face them together, as a family bound not just by blood, but by choice and love. And somewhere, Mitchell was sure, Ethan was watching over them, smiling at the unexpected gift his passing had brought. A brother found, a family reunited, and a legacy of hope that would continue to touch lives for years to come. As they drove away from the cemetery, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mitchell glanced at DeShawn, his heart full of love and pride for the man his son had become. And he knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Two men united by loss, bound by love, and dedicated to honoring the memory of the son and brother who had brought them together. In the end, their story was one of redemption, of second chances, and of the enduring power of family. Not just the family we're born into, but the family we choose and the family we build, one day and one act of love at a time. What would you do if you were in Officer Mitchell's shoes, discovering a son you never knew you had, or in DeShawn's place, facing a father and brother you never met? Could you both find the strength to build a bond out of loss and forgiveness? If this story of healing and second chances touched your heart, please consider subscribing. Thank you for joining me on this journey of love, family, and redemption. Your support means the world.